I assure you that the angels in heaven constantly behold my heavenly Father's face. One of the key texts for this feast of the Holy Guardian Angels. The children are particularly the centre of this particular Gospel, and also the question of how children are handled, scandalum. It's a stumbling block, something that one falls over, translated here as occasion of sin. Bad language used in the presence of a child, or exposing children to people who use bad language, or indeed nowadays machines which emit bad language, are modern forms of scandal, as are exposing children to various forms of aggressivity, violence, and even pornography on the screen, because it is creeping even into what used to be clean and pure children's hour, and things which before could be presumed to be okay, like Walt Disney. I think he's actually okay still, but you've got to be very careful now with what other stuff they are shown. Is he not? Oh, well, that's a new evolution then.
Well.
Really? That's interesting, because not having these things one isn't aware. But that's interesting as a development, because it's precisely the kind of thing that the demon will actually wiggle his well into. He wants the children, and he knows exactly how to do it subtly, bit by bit, and not obviously. That's his ploy. And if one looks around, that's precisely what's going on. It's bit by bit, not in one woomph, but it's crept in before one knows it. Hence, a great protection has to be always there with regard to the purity of a child. The reason being, of course, is that the devil wants as soon as he possibly can to get the first mortal sin. And that point in the life of a child is a big occasion, because the child has come straight from God, and if baptized is still somewhat angelic in orientation, and things like truthfulness and other things a child is very much aware of. We have one or two interesting lights from Maria Sima on this issue, who knew what could happen to a child who died, that she was aware of certain issues that children are aware very early on, and it's a divine inspiration and protection given to their system, the antibodies, but things like truthfulness and so on, and a child will come out with the truth eventually. He knows, because he feels inside if he's not said the truth, and so on, until eventually that stops. Then one is, in that point, the child is no longer totally open to grace, and if we're not careful, that can go on. Bad habits can come in, bad friends can become the norm, and so on, and we know where that leads to. So we need to protect our children in the name of God. Now, with regard to children themselves, they are also channels of predilection and even communication at times. I remember years ago at Clonacrot, there was a case we had in the giron of the community, a child whom a certain number of us knew to be very special, and had gifts, and it was a strange kettle of fish, but we would actually sometimes ask for a word through that child. Very interesting, even the major superiors were actually aware of the importance of this, and of course the answer was bang on each time. And of course it all stops with adolescence and so on, but particularly clean and pure families who protect their children, that can actually happen. And one or two other cases I've had too over the years that this actually can happen. A child is so pure that it actually is very, very close to God and can actually have gifts and favours. In fact, my being here now, in a sense, could be linked with that, because when things actually were a bit difficult at Clonacrot, we did ask for a word, and there were one or two, actually a few things said in different consultations, but one thing that came very quickly out was I had to be in Ireland. That was interesting. It also said, he said, the Lord would sing through this little child, because they wanted to know where and so on. It was to be east of Clonacrot, and this kind of thing is exactly where I am. It's all very strange. But anyway, that's a little parenthesis. The children, therefore, are the angels of the earth, and that's the expression used, I think, by Saint Jean Vianney, les anges de la terre, the angels of the earth. And we must keep them, therefore, clean and pure. A child, therefore, will naturally respond to a message of truth and grace. He's at home with prayer, with the presence, with the angels. And a child also initially is troubled when the contrary comes in. And that's precisely what the devil is trying to do, make it in such a way that the contrary is the norm, so that the child is also happy with the ugly, the violent, and so on. Now, there are indications of whether a person is in a state of grace, and therefore still in this angelic mode, because our souls in a state of grace are temples of the Holy Trinity, and therefore somewhat akin to the angels. We are at home with the angels, e.g. right now, as we come to the altar. On the contrary, when we are close to a person who is in that other mode of rejection of grace, our antibodies start to function. We do not particularly like that person's company, and that is normal. And it is normal also that we in some way try not to get into that company or delay ourselves in it more than we need to. And it is actually incompatible with a life of intimacy with the Blessed Trinity in us to be happy with that company where the Lord is actually being offended. After all, time is His. Therefore, in that wider context, a person who willingly puts on an unfiltered form of the television, or whatever it might be, is an indication to himself that he's not actually truly in intimacy, at least at that point. He's not actually handing over the control panel to the Lord. He's controlling and therefore responsible for the consequences. But there are a few indications of this being or not being in that angelic mode, in that state of grace, we're coming into which we normally return. Look at a person's face. You can see a lot in a person's face. There are indications after a while that a person is not at peace, even written in the face. As indeed one can see a lot of goodness in a person's eyes. I have noticed that actually early on in Ireland. I used to notice that, e.g. with regard to Irish nuns, the classical form of nuns, the great innocence and purity in the eyes of an Irish nun, at least way back, kept them young, kept them in that state of goodness and lightness. They were not contaminated. A person who has a lot of heaviness inside on the conscience, who is doing violence to his conscience, is actually hurting, and can only avoid that hurt by blocking out the messages coming from his deep interior, therefore by impulses, consenting again to sin, and so on. In other words, zooming into the exterior and avoiding the interior. Does that sound familiar? The exterior being the centre of attention, and that is precisely the ploy the devil has in Western society. Make sure that they're never in touch with themselves. But there are others too. As we navigate through life, we see people who are forever causing pain. There are some actually in authority who only manage to acquire balance and equilibrium in their life through exercising authority and therefore causing pain. There are people who are right through their existence emitting a black cloud of heaviness around them. People not at peace, issues never handled. Now, we know from, for instance, the children of Medjugorje, who have grown up of course, but early on they were being shown things. And at one stage they were shown Gehenna, they were shown the other place, like the children in Fatima. And one thing that was something which hit them was this. When they saw human souls going down there, they saw something happening. From being normal human souls, they were being transformed visibly before their eyes into something else, imitating, that is, taking the form of the ones that they had been colluding here on earth with, and sharing their company. And what was already a part of their pattern of life here on earth, hence this aggressiveness, ugliness of speech and behaviour was actually getting into their form of soul in the beyond. They were going to spend the rest of eternity with that company that they'd enjoyed in this life, and what at that point was happening was they were becoming demonic in appearance. And that was horrid to see. But that is actually what's going on with the case of a soul who is bit by bit moving away from the innocence of baptism and enjoying the company of foul talk, pornography, hatefulness, vendetta, all that smells of Gehenna. Just that we don't see it, or that we can have hints of it. Now, a soul who is in prayer, a soul who is also listening a lot, a soul who is sensitive and in some way with a radar system fully tuned in, picks up things in other souls and will orientate himself spontaneously towards souls in a good mode. Therefore, normally we know where we are safe, and the Lord has given us that antibody system. Always listen to that. You don't have to be close to every person who comes into your world, or to detain yourself in a long conversation with every Tom, Dick and Harry. We have to move on. People harm us. We are contaminated by contagion. These things matter because we're living in bodies, but we have souls, and therefore there's an affinity with the angelic world. Our souls will go on, and they will have the form that they merit in this world. But we need to be happy with the angels and with those who are close to the angels. And only souls in that mode can really actually have fellowship, a good old English word. Hence it is the big choices with regard to either entering, e.g., a monastic community or a seminary, or on the other side, a person you're going to marry. It's a huge thing, involving one's whole life with people of a certain type. One has to be relaxed with people who are in the same mode. And it can only happen genuinely on a profound level with people who deeply love the Lord, because then the Lord will make sure that they will not be hurting each other. But when that does happen, there is a re-found childhood. One notices that in healthy monastic communities, both male and female, there is a joy, la joie de vivre. There is an innocence there which is not made of either boisterousness or in any way something which is indecent, but a natural joy, an enjoyment of grace, and therefore the hope that we're going home together. We're on the winning side. It leads to joy. And it's only a fabrication of that that people, e.g. in the pub culture, can have. An apparent joy. It's not joy at all. It's a very bubbly froth with very little depth. Pleasure. It's a huge difference between joy and pleasure. So, with regard to the angels, just remember they're genuinely, really there. They sometimes, as it were, make their presence felt, especially if we're engaged in invoking them. They're only too ready to help. But there have been, in the life of quite a few saints, genuine communications with the angelic world. Some saints we know had contact with them. Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, I think when she was a child, used to see her angel a lot. I think she used to think the other children had the same thing. But there was Françoise Romaine, Francis of Rome. Certainly she had a great conversation going on. She was very much in touch with her guardian angel. I think she used to see him. And others will have been very much involved with using them, like Padre Pius. And Padre Pio, he would have been sending his angel and so on, and getting people to send their angels to him. I think the Curé was the same thing. They do actually go as messengers. In fact, the word angel means messenger, herald. Angelos, angelin in Greek is to announce. That's the very root of the word. And the case, for instance, of the saint of the miraculous medal, Catherine Labouré, she had this experience there at midnight, didn't she, when she was sleeping? This beautiful little child woke her and told her to come this way. Well, who was it? Probably her guardian angel, coming and showing the way, and she went through the process there, the lights burning in the middle of the night, and then she got there, and of course Our Blessed Lady was to encounter her. And one day, much later, they were trying to get out of her in recreation, that nun who saw the Blessed Virgin just was an imagination, and she couldn't, once she going to let out. The nun who saw the Blessed Virgin saw her in flesh and bones like you and me, she said. Now, unless you realise what she'd said. But in other words, she genuinely had put her hands on the knees of the Blessed Virgin. It was real encounter there, very interesting, because the Blessed Virgin can actually displace her body because it's in heaven. And I've told you before, I think that occasion which we had in Kilnacrock one night in one of these vigils, all-night vigils, where it actually happened, and we couldn't manage this, because this child saw her, that she was sitting on the work carrying. So basically, these are indications that sometimes heaven is closer to us than we think. The fact that we can't see it doesn't mean anything at all. We need to have the eyes of faith to be aware, e.g. at the altar, when some saints actually have, and this is way back in different generations, that experience has come to saints, that they've actually, for a fraction of a second, seen how many angels were at the altar. It's something huge. You can't imagine the number there. So when we come into the chant of the Sanctus, Holy, Holy, which is common to both East and West in some form, the Hagios, Agios, Trisagion is called in Greek, that goes right back to the early church. It goes right back to Isaiah, who saw things. The house was full of smoke. In other words, this is the presence, the Shekinah. The Shekinah comes from the word to have, inhabit. The Lord dwells in the smoke. The Lord is there. And also this cushion of angelic presence is there. So that's what we're coming into, hence the importance of protecting it with silence, respect, and also absorbing grace, because much grace is lost when we're not in that angelic mode. We go straight crashing back into conversation of the banal after receiving the Holy of Holies. Much grace is dispersed in the air. Just finish with one thing. When I was given to preach on, when I was been sent to give a retreat one time to some monks and nuns somewhere in France, and the prior was giving me one or two things to help me along, and one thing he gave me was this. It was the importance of one specific issue, the amount of grace that's lost at the end of a moment of encounter. Specifically, a moment of encounter, e.g. a moment of chanting the office, or whatever it might be in church. There is a cushion of protection inbuilt in the monastic life so that that is protected. One comes out gliding and drifting and in the continuation of mode. One does not come out and immediately start talking like that. There's a coming down like an aeroplane gradually. Now, anything therefore in the monastic world is protected by this huge ambience which raises up and keeps up that element of dignity and continuity of the moment of encounter. In the outside world, that has to be done by ourselves, and it's not easy. And therefore the place where one goes to Mass is not indifferent. That is something to be submitted to the Lord, because some places favour that moment of encounter and the fruitfulness of the graces received. Others disfavour it considerably. So one can lose a lot through getting into a mode of habitually losing that grace through being polite. It's a charity sometimes mal comprise, badly understood, because the God is the first loved, and then in that wider context others are loved as well. But it's not good to be giving that attention of that cosmic moment to human beings to talk about the football. So all these things is to be aware of what we're doing right now at the altar, where for a moment in time the Lord and his angels are coming into this little house and claiming it for their own. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo. Oremus.